The boy had nothing left to give, yet he was about to offer everything he had. Imagine a single act of courage changing a life forever. Stay tuned to find out how. By sunset the next day, an entire tribe would stand at his doorstep, carrying gifts that would transform a forgotten orphan into something he never imagined possible. But first, he had to cross that river. Emmett Sloan crouched by the muddy riverbank, filling his dented tin cup with brown water. The current ran fast and mean, swollen from 3 days of mountain rain. At 12 years old, he'd learned to read danger in the way water moved, the way it grabbed at fallen branches and pulled them under without mercy. His stomach cramped with hunger. 2 days since his last real meal, the old cabin where he'd been living sat empty behind him. Nothing but rotting wood and broken dreams. His parents' graves lay somewhere upstream, markers long since washed away by floods, just like this one. A sound came from across the river, a low groan, then silence. What would you do in that moment? Keep watching to see how one boy's choice changed everything on Narrative Odyssey. Emmett squinted through the morning mist. There, on the opposite bank, an elderly man struggled against the current. Native dress, silver hair braided down his back. The man's left leg dragged useless behind him as he gripped a walking stick, water rising to his chest. "Help!" the man called, his voice barely carrying over the rushing water. "Please." Emmett's first thought was to run. Strangers meant trouble, and trouble meant death out here. But something in the old man's eyes held him frozen. The same desperate emptiness he saw in his own reflection every morning. The man slipped, his walking stick torn away by the current. His head disappeared beneath the brown surface. Without thinking, Emmett plunged into the icy water. The current slammed into him like a fist, spinning him sideways. He fought against it, lungs burning, until his fingers found fabric, the old man's shirt. Together, they struggled toward the bank. Emmett's small frame somehow found strength he didn't know existed. The man's weight threatened to drag them both down, but Emmett refused to let go. They collapsed in the mud, both gasping. The elderly man's dark eyes met Emmett's, filled with something the boy had almost forgotten existed. "Gratitude, Grey Wolf," the man whispered, touching his own chest. Then he pointed at Emmett. "Brother!" Emmett helped Grey Wolf to his feet, letting the injured man lean on his shoulder. Step by careful step, they made their way up the muddy embankment. The walking stick was gone, claimed by the river, but Grey Wolf seemed stronger now, as if Emmett's presence gave him power. "My people," Grey Wolf said, pointing toward the distant mountains. "Must return," Emmett nodded, though he had no idea what that meant. He only knew that, for the first time in months, he wasn't alone. But neither of them realized that hidden eyes had been watching from the tree line. And by morning, everything would change. The old cabin offered little shelter, but it was all Emmett had to give. Grey Wolf limped inside, his injured leg leaving a trail of blood and river mud across the warped wooden floor. Emmett thought about the meager supplies hidden under loose floorboards. Half a loaf of moldy bread, some dried beans, a small pouch of salt. "Sit," Emmett said, guiding Grey Wolf to the only chair that wasn't broken. The old man's breathing came in short, painful gasps. His face had gone pale beneath weathered skin. Grey Wolf studied the empty cabin with sharp eyes that missed nothing. The torn blanket in the corner where Emmett slept. The cold fireplace filled with ash and debris. The walls bare, except for water stains and memories. "You live here alone?" Grey Wolf asked. Emmett nodded, suddenly ashamed. What must this dignified man think of him? A boy playing at survival in a rotting shack. "How long?" 8 months, Emmett said, pulling up the loose floorboard and retrieving his hidden supplies. The bread looked worse in daylight, green spots spreading across the crust. But he offered it anyway. "Since the fever took my parents." Grey Wolf accepted the bread with the same reverence others might show a fine meal. He broke off a small piece and handed the rest back. "Keep," he said firmly. "You need strength." They shared the bread in silence. Emmett watched Grey Wolf's face, searching for judgment or pity. Instead, he found respect, as if helping a stranger wasn't foolish, but brave. "Your parents," Grey Wolf said finally. "They raised a good son." The words hit Emmett harder than any river current. When had anyone last told him he was good? When had anyone seen value in the hollow-eyed boy who talked to shadows? Outside, thunder rumbled across the valley. More rain coming. Grey Wolf tried to stand, but his injured leg buckled. "Must go," he insisted. "My people worry." "Not in this storm," Emmett said. "Too dangerous." Grey Wolf's eyes flashed with something between frustration and fear. "You don't understand. They think me dead. My granddaughter, she has the sight. She sees things others cannot. If I don't return," he trailed off. But Emmett heard the unspoken words. Someone else would suffer. Someone Grey Wolf loved would pay for his absence. Rain began hammering the cabin roof. Through the single cracked window, Emmett could see the river rising, angry and impassable. "We'll wait for morning," Emmett decided. "I'll help you get home then." Grey Wolf gripped Emmett's shoulder with surprising strength. "The debt I owe you cannot be measured in words." Emmett didn't understand what that meant, but as he settled down on his torn blanket, he felt something new stirring in his chest. Purpose. For the first time in 8 months, someone needed him. What he didn't know was that 3 riders were already approaching through the storm, sent by Grey Wolf's tribe to find their missing elder, and they carried news that would turn everything upside down. The hoofbeats came through the rain like thunder, growing louder with each passing second. Emmett pressed his face to the cracked window, watching 3 dark shapes emerge from the storm. Riders moving fast and purposeful through the night. Grey Wolf struggled to his feet, despite his injured leg. "They come for me, friends?" Emmett asked, though something in the old man's voice suggested otherwise. "My people, but they don't know." Grey Wolf's words trailed off as the riders stopped outside the cabin. Through the rain, Emmett could see them dismounting, hands resting on weapons. A fist pounded against the door. "Open!" a voice commanded in accented English. "We know you're in there." Grey Wolf limped toward the door, but Emmett stepped in front of him. The boy's heart hammered against his ribs. But he'd learned that showing fear only made things worse. The door burst open. Before either could reach it, 3 native warriors filled the entrance, water streaming from their hair and clothes. The leader, a young man with fierce eyes and war paint still visible despite the rain, scanned the cabin until his gaze locked on Grey Wolf. "Grandfather," he said, his voice filled with relief and anger. "We thought you were dead." "Standing Wolf," Grey Wolf replied, touching his chest in greeting. "I am alive because of this boy." The warrior called Standing Wolf turned his attention to Emmett, his hand staying near his knife. "Suspicious you. What did you do to him?" "Nothing," Emmett said, lifting his chin. "I pulled him from the river." "Lies. White children don't save Indians." Grey Wolf spoke sharply in his native tongue. The warriors exchanged glances, clearly surprised by whatever he'd said. Standing Wolf's expression shifted from suspicion to confusion. "You risked your life?" Standing Wolf asked Emmett. "For a stranger," Emmett nodded. "He needed help." One of the other warriors whispered something that made Standing Wolf's eyes widen. Grey Wolf spoke again, longer this time, gesturing toward Emmett with obvious respect. "My grandfather says you have a pure heart." Standing Wolf translated slowly. "He says the Great Spirit sent you to save him." Emmett didn't know what to say to that. He'd just done what felt right. "Morning Star has been having visions," Standing Wolf continued. "She said grandfather would return with a gift from the river. We thought she meant an object." Grey Wolf placed his hand on Emmett's shoulder. "Not an object. A person. The warriors exchanged meaningful looks that Emmett couldn't interpret. Something important was happening here. Something beyond his understanding. The storm is passing, Standing Wolf observed. We ride at first light. Where? Emmett asked. Home, Grey Wolf said simply. You come with us. Emmett's stomach dropped. Leave the only home he'd ever known. Follow strangers into unknown territory. But then he looked around the rotting cabin, at the life that wasn't really living. Maybe unknown was better than empty. Why? He whispered. Grey Wolf smiled for the first time since Emmett had pulled him from the river. Because Morning Star sees more than visions, boy. She sees the future, and you're in it. But what none of them knew was that Morning Star's latest vision had shown her something else entirely. Something that would change, not just Emmett's destiny, but the fate of two peoples forever. Dawn broke clear and cold as they prepared to leave. Emmett gathered his few possessions. A faded photograph of his parents, his father's old knife, and the tin cup that had served him faithfully. Everything else he left behind, relics of a life that felt like someone else's memory. Standing Wolf helped Grey Wolf onto his horse, the old man wincing as his injured leg found the stirrup. Can you ride? He asked Emmett. Emmett shook his head. His parents had been farmers, not ranchers. You'll ride with me, Grey Wolf decided, patting the space behind his saddle. The journey took most of the morning, winding through pine forests and across meadows that stretched toward distant mountains. Emmett had never traveled so far from the cabin. The world felt impossibly vast, filled with possibilities he'd never imagined. As they rode, Grey Wolf spoke quietly about his people. We are a small tribe, he explained. Many of our young men have left for the cities. The old ways grow weak, but Morning Star sees. Standing Wolf added from his horse, nearby. She keeps the traditions alive. Tell me about her, Emmett said. Grey Wolf's voice softened with obvious love. My granddaughter. Her mother died in childbirth. Her father in a hunting accident. She has lived with visions since she was very young. Sometimes they bring comfort. Sometimes they bring warning. What did she see about me? The old man was quiet for a long moment. A bridge, he said finally, between two worlds that have forgotten how to speak to each other. Emmett didn't understand, but something in those words made his chest tight with unexpected emotion. They crested a hill, and the tribal camp spread out below them. A dozen lodges, arranged in a circle around a central fire pit. Children played between the structures, while women worked at various tasks. It looked peaceful, complete in a way that made Emmett's lonely cabin seem even more hollow by comparison. But as they descended, Emmett noticed something strange. People stopped what they were doing to stare at him, not with hostility, but with an odd mixture of curiosity and recognition, as if they'd been expecting him. A young woman emerged from the largest lodge. She moved with quiet grace, her dark hair adorned with feathers and small bells that chimed softly as she walked. When she looked at Emmett, her eyes held depths that seemed far older than her years. Morning Star, Grey Wolf said as they dismounted. She approached slowly, studying Emmett's face with unsettling intensity. When she spoke, her English was precise and careful. You are the one from my dreams. Emmett felt heat creep up his neck. I don't understand. 3 moons ago, I saw you in the river saving grandfather. But I also saw something else. She paused, glancing at Grey Wolf. I saw you teaching our children, and our children teaching yours. I don't have children, Emmett said. Morning Star smiled. Not yet, but the spirits show me what will be, not what is. Around them, more tribal members had gathered. An elderly woman nodded approvingly. A group of young men whispered among themselves. Children peeked out from behind their mothers' skirts, pointing at the strange, pale boy who'd ridden in with their respected elder. Chief Standing Bear emerged from the large lodge, his presence commanding immediate silence. He was a man built for leadership, broad shoulders, and intelligent eyes that seemed to weigh every word before it was spoken. "Grandfather tells me you saved his life," the chief said to Emmett. "Anyone would have done the same," Emmett replied. "No," Morningstar interrupted. "They would not. That is why the spirits chose you." The chief studied Emmett for a long moment. Then he turned to address the gathered tribe in their native language. His words sparked excited murmurs and nods of agreement. "We have decided," Chief Standing Bear announced, switching back to English. "Tonight, we will hold a ceremony for you." "What kind of ceremony?" Emmett asked, suddenly nervous. Morningstar's eyes sparkled with something that might have been mischief, the kind that changes everything. But none of them, not even Morningstar with all her visions, could have predicted what would happen when the sun finally set and the drums began to beat. As darkness fell, the entire tribe gathered around a massive fire that sent sparks dancing toward the star-filled sky. Emmett sat cross-legged on a woven mat, feeling every pair of eyes focused on him. The flames cast shifting shadows across weathered faces, creating an otherworldly atmosphere that made his heart race. Chief Standing Bear rose, his voice carrying across the circle. "Tonight, we honor one who showed the true meaning of courage. Not the courage of war, but the courage of compassion." The drums began, low and rhythmic. They seemed to vibrate through the ground and into Emmett's bones. Several tribal members stood and began to dance, their movements telling a story he couldn't understand, but somehow felt. Morningstar leaned close to whisper in his ear. "They're dancing the story of the river, of how you chose to risk everything for a stranger." Grey Wolf limped forward, carrying something wrapped in soft leather. He knelt before Emmett and carefully unfolded the bundle, revealing a magnificent necklace. Hand-carved beads of turquoise and silver caught the firelight, but at the center hung something that made Emmett's breath catch. A small carved figure of a bear, its eyes inlaid with what looked like precious stones. "This belonged to my son," Grey Wolf said, his voice thick with emotion. "Morningstar's father. He died protecting others, just as you risked yourself to protect me." Emmett shook his head. "I can't take something so valuable." "You already have," Morningstar said softly. "When you chose to save Grandfather, you became part of our family. The necklace just makes it official." Grey Wolf placed the necklace around Emmett's neck. The weight of it felt significant, like accepting a responsibility he didn't fully understand. Chief Standing Bear spoke again, his words formal and ceremonial. "From this day forward, you are River Walker, friend to our people. Your courage has earned you a place at our fires, for as long as you wish to stay." The tribal members erupted in celebration, voices raised in songs that seemed to come from the earth itself. Children ran up to touch the necklace, giggling when Emmett smiled at them. Women brought him food, real food, more than he'd seen in months. For the first time since his parents died, Emmett felt like he belonged somewhere. But as the celebration continued, he noticed Morningstar had grown quiet. She stared into the fire with an expression of growing concern. "What is it?" he asked. "The vision is changing," she whispered. "I see men coming, angry men. They seek to drive us from our land." "When?" Her eyes met his, filled with a fear that chilled him more than any winter wind. "Tomorrow. They come tomorrow." Around them, the celebration continued. But Emmett's joy curdled in his stomach. The necklace suddenly felt heavy around his neck, not with honor, but with the weight of coming disaster. "What do we do?" he asked. Morningstar's hand found his, her grip surprisingly strong. "We pray that your courage extends beyond rivers, River Walker, because tomorrow you may need to choose between your old life and your new one." The drums beat on, but now they sounded less like celebration and more like the heartbeat of something afraid. Dawn brought the thunder of approaching horses. Emmett woke to frantic voices and the sound of children crying. Through the lodge entrance, he could see tribal members rushing to gather precious belongings, their movements quick and practiced, as if they'd done this before. Morning Star appeared beside him, her face grim. 12 riders armed. They fly the territorial flag. Emmett scrambled outside and immediately spotted the dust cloud rising from the valley below. Even at this distance, he could see the glint of weapons and the hard set of men who'd come for trouble. Chief Standing Bear was already organizing the tribe's response. "Take the children to the caves," he commanded the women. "Men, gather what weapons we have." "No," Grey Wolf said, leaning heavily on his walking stick. "These are not war riders. They come to talk, but with threats behind their words." "How do you know?" Standing Wolf asked. "Because one of them carries a white flag," Morning Star observed, pointing toward the approaching group. Emmett squinted and saw she was right, but the flag looked more like a formality than a genuine gesture of peace. "They want to make us an offer we cannot refuse," Grey Wolf said bitterly. "Move on, or be moved." The riders crested the hill and spread into a line facing the camp. Their leader, a man with a badge glinting on his chest and cold eyes that missed nothing, urged his horse forward. "I'm Marshal Bennett," he called out. "Which one of you speaks for this tribe?" Chief Standing Bear stepped forward, with a dignity that made the marshal's posture seem crude by comparison. "I am Chief Standing Bear. You are not welcome here, but we will hear your words." "Good, because I've got papers from the territorial government. This land has been sold to mining interests. You've got 3 days to pack up and move out." "This is our ancestral land," the chief replied calmly. "No man can sell what was never his to own." Marshal Bennett's hand drifted toward his gun. "The law says different, Chief. And I'm here to enforce the law." That's when Emmett noticed something that made his blood run cold. One of the riders was staring directly at him, a man with cruel eyes and a scarred face. "Well, well," the scarred man called out. "Looks like we got ourselves a white boy playing Indian. You lost, son." Before Emmett could answer, the man continued. "I know you. You're that orphan boy from the dead farm upstream. Tom Fletcher's kid." Emmett's heart hammered against his ribs. How did this stranger know his father's name? "Matter of fact," the scarred man continued, with a nasty grin, "your daddy owed some people money before he died. Gambling debts. Guess who inherited them?" The world seemed to tilt around Emmett. His father had been a quiet farmer, not a gambler, but the man's confident tone suggested he wasn't lying. "That's right, boy. You come with us now, work off Daddy's debt, and maybe we let these Indians pack up peaceful-like. But if you want to play family with the savages..." He let the threat hang in the air. Emmett felt Morning Star's hand touch his arm. Grey Wolf stepped protectively closer. The tribe waited to see what their newest member would choose. His old life was calling, demanding payment for sins he didn't even know existed. But looking into the faces of the people who'd welcomed him as family, Emmett realized the scarred man had made a critical mistake. He'd given Emmett something to fight for that was bigger than fear. "Marshal," Emmett said, his voice steadier than he felt. "I think you need to hear what really happened to my father." The scarred man's grin faltered, because he just revealed that this wasn't about land or mining rights at all. Emmett stepped forward, the sacred necklace catching the morning light. "My father never gambled a day in his life," he said clearly. "But I know who did." The scarred man's face darkened. "Boy, you better watch your mouth." "My father kept records," Emmett continued, his voice growing stronger. "Every transaction, every debt, every payment, hidden under the cabin floorboards where I found them after he died." This was a lie, but Emmett could see uncertainty flicker in the scarred man's eyes. Tom Fletcher was the most honest man in the territory, Marshal Bennett said slowly. "Never heard tell of him owing anybody anything." "That's because he didn't." Emmett pressed on. but someone's been using his name to steal from people. Someone who thought a dead man couldn't defend himself. The scarred man's hand moved toward his gun. "Shut your mouth, boy." "Briggs," Marshall Bennett warned. "Let the kid talk." So the scarred man's name was Briggs. Emmett filed that away as he continued his desperate gamble. "Check the territorial records, Marshall. I bet you'll find a lot of debts signed with my father's name, all after he died, all in handwriting that doesn't match his." Morning Star stepped beside Emmett, her presence giving him courage. "This man speaks truth," she said to the marshal. "I see deception in the other one's heart. Indian magic tricks won't work here." Briggs snarled, but sweat had appeared on his forehead. Marshall Bennett studied both men carefully. "Briggs, you got documentation for these debts?" "Of course I do." Briggs reached into his saddlebag, but his movements were jerky, nervous. That's when Chief Standing Bear spoke up. "This man came to our camp 2 moons ago. He offered to buy our land for his mining friends. When we refused, he threatened us." "That's not illegal," Marshall Bennett said. "No," the chief agreed, "but forging documents is." The marshal's eyes sharpened. "You saying Briggs has been running a con?" "I'm saying," Grey Wolf interjected, stepping forward despite his injured leg, "that some men will do anything to steal what isn't theirs. Land from us, honor from the dead." Briggs's face had gone red with rage. "You're all lying. That boy owes money, and these savages need to move." "Show me the papers," Marshall Bennett commanded. Briggs hesitated. In that moment of uncertainty, Emmett saw something that changed everything. The man was scared. Not angry scared, but guilty scared. "Actually," the marshal continued, his voice taking on a dangerous edge, "I'm curious about something else. Got word last week about some forged mining claims. Claims signed by dead men. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you, Briggs?" That's got nothing to do with..." "See, the problem is," Marshall Bennett said, dismounting from his horse, "I've been tracking a forgery ring for months, and funny thing about forgers, they usually stick to what they know, names they've used before." Emmett felt a surge of hope, but it died quickly when he saw Briggs's expression change from fear to desperate rage. "Enough," Briggs roared, drawing his gun. "I'll settle this right now." But he didn't aim at the marshal or the chief. He aimed directly at Emmett. "The boy dies, and this all goes away," Briggs said, his voice deadly calm. No witnesses, no questions. Time seemed to freeze as Emmett stared down the barrel of the gun, knowing he had seconds to live. The shot rang out across the valley, but it wasn't Briggs who fired. Standing Wolf's arrow had found its mark first, piercing Briggs's gun hand. The weapon spun away, discharging harmlessly into the dirt. Before Briggs could move, Marshall Bennett had him on the ground, knee pressed into his back. "Jasper Briggs," the marshal said, snapping iron shackles around the man's wrists. "You're under arrest for forgery, fraud, and attempted murder." Briggs writhed in the dirt, clutching his wounded hand. "This isn't over. The mining company still wants this land." "The mining company that paid you to forge claims." Marshall Bennett stood, brushing dust from his knees. "Funny thing about that, when we arrest their partner for forgery, those claims tend to disappear real quick." Emmett felt his legs go weak with relief. Morning Star steadied him, her touch warm and grounding. "As for you, Chief Standing Bear," the marshal continued, "I'll be filing a report that your tribe's land rights are legitimate and protected. Any future disputes go through proper territorial courts." The chief nodded with dignity. "Justice serves all people when good men enforce it." Marshall Bennett mounted his horse, his men hauling the still protesting Briggs up behind one of the riders. "Boy," he called to Emmett, "you got courage speaking up like that. Your father would be proud." As the lawmen rode away with their prisoner, the tribal camp erupted in celebration. Children who had been hiding in the caves came running back. Women emerged from the lodges with relieved smiles. The threat was over, but Grey Wolf approached Emmett with a serious expression. "You have a choice to make, River Walker. The marshal offered to take you back to town, find you proper guardians among your own people." Emmett looked around at the faces surrounding him. These people had welcomed him as family when he had nothing. They'd stood beside him when danger came. They'd given him a name that meant something. "My own people," Emmett said, touching the sacred necklace around his neck. "These are my people." Morning Star smiled, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "The vision is complete. You have chosen to build the bridge between worlds." Chief Standing Bear placed a hand on Emmett's shoulder. "Then you will learn our ways, and we will learn from yours. Together we will be stronger." As the sun climbed higher, the tribe began preparations for another ceremony, not one of farewell this time, but of permanent welcome. Emmett helped Grey Wolf to his favorite spot by the fire, the old man's injured leg finally beginning to heal properly. "Do you regret it?" Grey Wolf asked. Leaving your old life behind, Emmett thought about the empty cabin, the lonely months, the desperate hunger. Then he looked at the bustling camp around him, filled with laughter and purpose and belonging. "No," he said firmly, "I was drowning before you came along. You didn't just save me from that river. You saved me from myself." Grey Wolf smiled. "The river gives and the river takes. Today, it gave us both new life." That evening, as the celebration fires burned bright and the drums sang stories of courage and family, Emmett felt the last pieces of his broken heart heal. He was no longer the forgotten orphan boy who talked to shadows. He was River Walker, bridge between worlds, son of two peoples, and proof that sometimes the family you choose is stronger than the one you're born into. The boy who had nothing left to give had found that love multiplies when shared, and courage grows when it serves others. His transformation was complete. If you enjoyed this unforgettable tale of courage and destiny, click the video on your screen now to watch another incredible story from the frontier on Narrative Odyssey. Don't forget to subscribe to Narrative Odyssey and consider a super chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything to Narrative Odyssey.